Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences, slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. On the morning of July 31st, 1991, the universe makes a quiet mistake. Harry Potter stands in the narrow hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, staring at a dull brass letterbox that does not rattle, does not bulge, does not fight back against Vernon Dursley's meaty hands. The world expects owls, green ink, a half-giant breaking down the door to announce destiny. Instead, there is only the thin, suffocating silence of a very normal birthday. The wizarding world operates under a different delusion in this timeline, that its systems are infallible, that no prophecy child can slip between the gears of bureaucracy and war. They are wrong. The greatest catastrophe of the age is not Voldemort's rise, nor Dumbledore's secrets, but a single administrative failure, one letter misrouted, one retrieval mission delayed until the moment passes, and the boy who lived is quietly left off the roll. In the kitchen, Petunia scrubs a spotless counter, listening for the telltale thud of abnormality that never comes. Upstairs, the trace hums faintly around an underfed boy whose accidental magic has begun to spike in intensity and frequency. Yet no owl arrives with the institutional mercy of explanation. The Dursleys misread the silence as victory. The Ministry, drowning in parchment and self-congratulation, misreads it as stability. Hogwarts proceeds to its September feast without ever setting a place for the child whose soul resonance once split a Dark Lord. In that vaulted great hall, candles float, ghosts glide, and an empty space at the Gryffindor table is quietly repurposed for another nameless first year. Quirinus Quirrell will still touch cursed stone, still bow his head to the wraith in the Albanian forests. But when he returns to the castle, there is no 11-year-old anomaly to stand between him and the Philosopher's Stone. The safeguards Dumbledore trusts are elegant, but they are not tactically lethal. A school designed as a fortress of tradition simply continues its rituals, while the real war shifts beyond its walls. The question that haunts this dark timeline is brutally simple. What does a forgotten savior become? An obscurial, imploding under years of repression and fear, a weapon being polished in the dark by resentment and raw, undirected power, or something even less predictable than either Dumbledore or Voldemort ever allowed for, a masterpiece to be molded by neglect instead of by design. Today, we dismantle the comforting myth that Harry's letter was inevitable, that fate would always find its way to the smallest bedroom on Privet Drive. With methodical certainty, we will reconstruct this alternate history year by year, tracing how every missed owl and every unchecked outburst twists the resonance of the coming war. We begin with an 11-year-old boy staring at a silent letterbox, and we will follow the consequences until Hogwarts, the Ministry, and the Dark Lord finally realize what they left unclaimed. By then, it may already be too late to decide whether Harry Potter is their savior, their enemy, or simply the authority that rises from the ruins when both have failed. The night the system blinked, redrawing, Halloween, 1981. The wizarding world tells itself that Halloween, 1981, is a closed chapter. A dark lord falls, a child survives, and destiny is neatly archived. They are wrong. Godric's Hollow burns under the killing curse. James and Lily die buying seconds. The spell rebounds with a force that will haunt every future war. Dumbledore reads the omen with methodical certainty, retrieves the child, and deposits him on Privet Drive, trusting blood wards and muggle mediocrity to do what no fortress could, hide the boy who lived in plain sight. The narrative pretends that from that moment, the machinery of Hogwarts hums along flawlessly in the background. Under that narrative lies the bureaucracy. In a locked tower, the Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance sit in eternal vigil, recording every child whose magic stirs. This is the quiet engine that guarantees no witch or wizard is lost. The quill scratches a name the instant soul resonance flares. The book seals it, and staff protocols unfurl. Letters scheduled, visits assigned, contingencies prepared. By the time Harry is left on the Dursleys' doorstep, his name should already be inked, his future mapped with administrative precision. In this timeline, the night Voldemort shatters himself against an infant's protection, something else fractures. The killing curse does not simply rebound. It splinters, its dying magic lashing out blindly through wards and distance. For a heartbeat, the tower's silence is broken. The quill jerks mid-stroke over the open page, catching a surge of power so violent it reads less as a child awakening and more as a weapon being polished in the dark. The book, ancient and cautious, interprets the anomaly as instability rather than admission. The divergence is almost insultingly mundane, a misclassification. Harry James Potter is not marked non-magical, but flagged, deep in a margin no human eye routinely checks, as a potential late bloomer whose accidental magic is dangerously suppressed. The system assumes that if and when this volatile core stabilizes, the quill will return, amend, correct. Until then, protocol dictates restraint. No letters, no visits, no disturbance of the Dursley facade. We will call this motif the silent ledger. Harry's name is written in destiny, but misfiled in bureaucracy, trapped in the gap between prophecy and practice. The Slytherin timeline is not born from a grand decision, but from a clerical hesitation. This transforms Harry's role with surgical cruelty. He is no longer a celebrated hero in waiting, orbiting Dumbledore's plans and Hogwarts' traditions. He becomes an unclaimed asset, a variable the system loses track of, drifting outside the curated channels that would have made him legible to either side of the coming war. In the Muggle world, he is a neglected boy. In the magical world, he is a missing entry, absent from rosters, from staff briefings, from every projection of future power. The image that anchors this divergence is microscopic, a tower room, dust unmoving, the book open on a blank line where Harry James Potter should blaze. The quill hovers, trembles, touches down just long enough to leave a blot. Then, reading chaos where it expected clarity, it skips to the next birth, the next safe certainty. That skipped stroke will echo through every school year we're about to rewrite. And when Hogwarts finally notices the omission carved into its own records. The boy it forgot may already be tactically lethal. Growing up in the dark, Harry's extended life with the Dursleys. The ink that never dries on the Hogwarts register condemns Harry to a different curriculum. 3 more years of Privet Drive as a sealed laboratory. The world imagines him unpacking robes and an owl on September 1st. They are wrong. In this timeline, the cupboard under the stairs remains his primary address long after 11, its dust and spiderwebs hardening into a permanent architecture of neglect. From 11 to 13, Privet Drive becomes a closed system, a suburban fortress of denial. The smells are precise. Frying bacon on Dudley's birthday, bleach in the bathroom, stale carpet in the cupboard when Vernon reminds Harry where he belongs. The textures are repetitive to the point of madness. The thin mattress, the splinter in the doorframe, the loose floorboard he has pried up and repaired so many times, it feels like a ritual. Birthdays are not merely ignored, they blur, each year marked only by the quiet inventory of what has not changed. No letter, no explanation. The absence itself acquires a kind of authority, an active cruelty masquerading as silence. But the magic does not respect this imposed stasis. Without Hagrid's clumsy reassurance, or McGonagall's stern context, accidental magic escalates with a methodical certainty that feels less like childish outbursts and more like a system learning. The zoo glass does not simply vanish. A year later, every pane in the Dursleys' conservatory implodes inward on the same heartbeat, the shards hovering for one suspended second before raining down in a glittering storm that somehow cuts no one. Plates do not merely crack when Vernon shouts. They shatter in synchronized patterns, arcs, and spirals across the kitchen tiles, as if responding to some buried geometry of rage. The weather begins to answer him. A cloudless July afternoon collapses into a localized downpour that drenches only number 4, leaving the rest of the street sunlit and dry. On another night, when Harry lies awake cataloguing every insult of the day, the wind rises and presses against the house until the eaves creak, as though the building itself is being asked to confess. This is no trained wand work, but it carries an eerie soul resonance with Tom Riddle's childhood experiments, rabbits hanging lifeless, bullies punished with wordless precision, and with the nameless obscurials whose magic turns inward and devours them. Harry is not yet a weapon being polished in the dark, but the potential is visible in the fractures. The Dursleys' response mutates from blustering denial to genuine fear. Vernon doubles down first, of course, attempting to beat the freakishness out of him with the same crude tools he uses on Dudley's teachers: volume, threats, fists. On the table, the house notices. Chairs skitter out of his reach. Doors slam in his face without hands touching them. Once, when he grabs Harry by the collar, every light bulb in the house detonates simultaneously, plunging them into a darkness that feels almost intentional. Petunia, who knows exactly what this means, stops calling him boy quite so loudly when the neighbours might hear. Her horror is quieter, more strategic, as she layers new locks, heavier curtains, and elaborate lies about boarding school applications to explain Harry's increasing invisibility. Their project shifts from suppression to concealment. Harry is kept indoors for weeks after each major incident. not for his safety, but for theirs. Vernon cannot afford questions, and Petunia cannot bear the possibility that anyone from that world might look too closely and see Lily's eyes blazing behind broken glass. In the background, the Ministry's trace murmurs its imperfect alarm. Magic is repeatedly flagged in little whinging, but without a wand signature. And with Dumbledore's protective wards muffling the intensity, the reports are categorized as ambient anomalies, faulty sensors, Muggle interference, atmospheric distortion. No auror is dispatched. No letter is resent by hand. The bureaucratic machine records a pattern of distress and then, with institutional indifference, files it away. By 13, the experiment has produced its first stable result. Harry lies awake not in a cupboard now, but in Dudley's discarded second bedroom, staring at the ceiling he has repainted himself, listening to the unnatural quiet of a house that fears him. He has reached a conclusion. The world is wrong. Its rules do not apply to him, and his own emotions can rewrite glass, weather, and bone. He understands one more thing, and it is colder. He is dangerous, and no one is coming to explain why. Dumbledore's blind spot, backup plans that never trigger. In another world, this is the moment a half-giant knocks down the door and tells him he is wanted. In this timeline, the door holds. The knock never comes. And the failure is not random. It is engineered by the very redundancies meant to protect him. Dumbledore's design is, on parchment, a fortress of safety nets. Blood wards on Privet Drive, keyed to Petunia's reluctant acceptance, monitor only the most primal metrics. Harry's pulse, his location, the simple binary of alive or dead. The Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance have already inked his name in spidery script, a methodical certainty that the boy who lived will be summoned at 11. A parallel tradition, professors visiting Muggle-borns in person, exists precisely to catch those who might be bewildered or obstructed. Over all of it, like a shadow across the decade, hangs the prophecy he alone has heard in full, whispering that Harry's training is not optional, but a strategic necessity in a coming war. They are wrong, not in their existence, but in their calibration. Clinically, each system fails along the axis of what it refuses to see. The wards, tuned only to mortal peril, register Harry as stable, even as his psychological state corrodes. Bruises fade, bones knit, and the magic that flares in his blood is interpreted as proof of vitality, not distress. The Book of Admittance, confronted with a child whose accidental magic has become defensive, suppressed, almost occluded under chronic fear, misclassifies his profile. The name Harry Potter remains, but the pattern of incidents resembles a late-blooming, low-priority case rather than a masterpiece to be moulded immediately. Within the staff, the surname itself becomes its own trap. Potter reads as old wizarding stock. The quiet assumption is that whoever holds that name is already inside the loop, not a Muggle-raised unknown rotting behind net curtains. Dumbledore overlays all this with one more variable: acceptable delay. On paper, a year's postponement might look merciful, even wise. Give the boy one more summer of childhood, one more cycle, where the world does not yet demand that he be a weapon. In his tower, the headmaster convinces himself that time is a neutral resource, that a late letter is an inconvenience, not a wound. In the Dursley house, delay is not neutral. It is corrosive. Every month without explanation deepens the association between magic and punishment, between power and secrecy. Behind that miscalculation lies a colder calculus. Move too early, and he risks drawing the gaze of surviving Death Eaters to Privet Drive, risking ambush, hostage-taking, or the premature activation of whatever soul resonance still links Harry and Voldemort. Wait, and he gambles that the wards, the book, and the Ministry's underage magic monitors will flag any true emergency. In the Slytherin timeline, he waits too long. The scales tip, not with an explosion, but with a bureaucratic shrug. Picture the office, shelves heavy with instruments, silver devices spinning in slow orbits, a muted scrying pane showing a stylized model of little whinging, tiny lights pulsing to indicate heartbeat, location, ambient magical pressure. Everything reads within parameters. Stable, contained. Dumbledore watches for a moment, sees no spike, no flare, no obvious threat, and turns away to other crises, unaware that the absence of volatility is its own alarm. The light over Privet Drive holds steady, a calm, unwavering glow. A weapon is being polished in the dark, and the man who needs him most has already looked away. A weapon without a forge. Harry's self-taught magic and fractured identity. The calm glow above Privet Drive becomes Harry's only confirmation that he is not imagining the war inside his own skin. The adults treat the silence as proof that everything is fine. They are wrong. By 12, the accidents have become experiments. Harry waits until the Dursleys sleep, then sits in the smallest bedroom with a chipped mug held out at arm's length, eyes narrowed, jaw locked. He wills it upward. The first night, it twitches and drops. A week later, it hovers for 3 seconds. He counts under his breath, learns that the more he concentrates on the weight, the steadier it becomes, like his will is a hand closing around invisible string. Then he notices the pattern. When Vernon has been particularly vicious, when the anger is fresh and clean and hot, the mug hangs longer, the air around it tightening with a low, electric resonance. Anger sharpens. He can thread power through a single object, hold it like a knife point. Fear, however, does something else. The night Dudley and his friends corner him outside the supermarket. The world blurs, the pavement cracks, every streetlight on Magnolia Road detonates in a shower of sparks. Power, yes, raw, immense, but imprecise, spilling beyond his intent like a burst dam. In this timeline, that is his curriculum. No wands, no incantations, no kindly professor correcting his wrist movement. Where Canon Harry fumbles a levitation charm under Flitwick's watchful eye, this Harry is building a primitive, feral syllabus. How long can he keep a spider suspended above his pillow? How far can he push a locked door before the frame screams and gives? It is the same core talent, the same soul resonance, but here it is being forged by shame and survival instead of guided by authority. The result is not a prodigy in robes, it is a weapon being polished in the dark. With each success, his worldview calcifies. Rules do not apply to him, they bend or they break. Teachers at school sense something and flinch away, papers graded too cautiously, eyes sliding off him in the corridor. Adults either fear him without understanding why, or they lie, like the aunt who insists, with brittle insistence, that there is nothing wrong with you, Hogwarts. He hears it first through the wall, Petunia hissing it at Vernon during one of their low, urgent arguments about letters and owls and that old man. Later, rummaging for a hidden birthday card, he finds an envelope jammed behind cleaning supplies, addressed in emerald ink to the cupboard under the stairs. He traces the H with a shaking finger until the paper softens. This, more than any outburst of power, tells him the world has explanations and has withheld them. Hogwarts becomes a North Star and an accusation. There is a place that knows what he is, and it chose not to come. By 13, the decision settles over him with methodical certainty. If the fortress will not open its gates, he will lay siege. If the world insists on remaining distant and abstract, he will force it into focus. One way or another, he will make Hogwarts say his name. And when he finally does, the war that follows will not be one the castle is prepared to fight. The trace screams. When the Ministry finally notices, the world assumes that if a child's magic grows too wild, Hogwarts will simply arrive sooner, not later. They are wrong. In this timeline, the silence stretches so long that when it finally breaks, it does so like a fault line tearing open under Privet Drive. It happens on a wet August evening, a week after Harry's 13th birthday, in the cramped, airless box that passes for his bedroom. Vernon's rage has evolved from blows to a more efficient cruelty. Starvation, isolation, the methodical erosion of personhood. When he rips open the door to drag Harry downstairs as unpaid labour, his hand closes around Harry's wrist with the casual authority of someone who believes the boy is already broken. He is not broken. He is pressure. The shove comes first, Vernon's, not Harry's, slamming him into the wall, cracking plaster, jolting every half-contained spark in his nervous system. The second impact is not physical. Every bulb in the house detonates in synchronized white flare. The television implodes. The refrigerator howls and dies. Electricity abandons number 4 in a single, shuddering exhale. In the dark, objects lift. Not one or two, but all of them. Cutlery, framed photographs, cupboard doors, Dudley's trophies. Drawn into a slow, spiraling orbit around Harry, like debris around a collapsing star. Dudley screams when a carving knife kisses his cheek and keeps going, circling back with predatory patience. Petunia's voice shreds itself on his name. Vernon lunges, and that is the final trigger. Harry does not raise a wand. He has never held one, but the air compresses around him, then detonates outward in a violent, invisible shockwave. Every window on Privet Drive shatters in perfect unison, glass erupting into the suburban evening like a localized war. The trace was never designed for this. Under normal conditions, it registers discrete spell signatures, a hover charm here, a mending charm there, logged with bureaucratic indifference. This is not a spell. This is a sustained magical anomaly, a pulsing locus of soul resonance, centered with methodical certainty on one adolescent body. Algorithms buried in the Ministry's monitoring lattice flag, it first as a level 3 disturbance, then as the blackout ripples through the grid, auto-escalate. Level 5. Potential obscurial event. Owls launch before any human has finished reading the report. In the bowels of the ministry, faceless clerks move parchment from one tray to another with the cold efficiency of a machine. Form 7B, underage magic warning. Form 9K, muggle containment risk. Each memo routes, as it always has, through a quiet encrypted channel to Albus Dumbledore's wards. For years, his obfuscation has blurred Harry's readings into background noise, protecting the boy from petty interference and, conveniently, from attention. Tonight, the wards do not blur, they scream. For the first time, the overlay fails to downrank the alert. The incident report arrives on Dumbledore's desk, not as a polite advisory, but as a red-banded dossier stamped with a single, clinical phrase: subject, maybe obscurial or uncontrolled weapon. The old man reads the line twice. The academic part of his mind notes the terminology drift from child to subject to weapon with professional disgust. The strategist in him recognizes the indictment. Harry Potter was meant to be a masterpiece, to be molded within stone walls and house points, not a weapon being polished in the dark by neglect and fear. In this Slytherin timeline, Dumbledore finally understands that his acceptable delay has produced a teenager whose power has grown without narrative, without loyalty, without any reason to see the wizarding world as anything but another abuser. Protocol dictates a friendly emissary with a cake. Protocol is quietly overridden. The final internal memo does not request Hagrid. It authorizes an enforcement squad, 3 auras, 1 obliviator, 1 unspeakable specializing in obscurials, to proceed to Surrey with full discretion. Their orders are not to welcome a student. Their orders are to assess a threat. Hogwarts without Harry, rewriting the first 4 years of war. The enforcement squad never reaches Privet Drive in time to prevent the larger failure, because while the Ministry stalks an alleged obscurial in Surrey, Hogwarts itself proceeds into 1991 without its supposed axis. The castle opens its doors, the boats cross the lake, the Sorting Hat sings about unity and impending war. The boy who lived does not walk through the Great Hall. In this timeline, the absence is not poetic, it is operational. The first year of war, 1991 to 1992, unfolds under a veneer of normalcy. Quirinus Quirrell still returns from his alpine pilgrimage. With a parasite beneath his turban, still infiltrates the third-floor protections, still tests the wards with methodical certainty, but without 3 unsupervised first years to blunder into the gauntlet. Every failure is discovered by staff, not students. Fluffy's door is rewarded. The troll incident becomes a quiet scandal in the staff room, not a legend in the dormitories. Each obstacle is refined, data gathered, counters adjusted. Under Voldemort's whisper, Quirrell iterates. By spring, he no longer needs a child's mirror epiphany. He has watched Dumbledore use the Mirror of Erased, mapped its soul resonance, and forces a confrontation in the headmaster's office rather than a dungeon chamber. The stone is either destroyed in open combat or taken in silence. Either way, the duel is between generals, not a boy and a ghost. The second year, 1992 to 1993, is where the Slytherin timeline begins to bleed. The diary still finds Ginny Weasley, But without a Parseltongue hero, without a Gryffindor trio, pattern-matching woosters, spiders and pipes, the chamber remains open far longer. Attacks do not stop at petrification. They escalate as Tom Riddle learns the rhythms of the school and the political leverage of fear. Parents withdraw their children. Governors move to close Hogwarts. In the vacuum of student resistance, the diary feeds, thickens, and experiments with embodiment. By the time the staff finally brute force the entrance, driven by mounting casualties, rather than a basilisk trail, a 16-year-old Riddle is no longer a memory projection. He is walking, speaking, tactically lethal. The third year, 1993 to 1994, never receives its exoneration arc. Sirius Black escapes Azkaban, but there is no godson on the grounds to justify his risk, no marauder's map in childish hands, no impulsive midnight chases. Pettigrew remains a Weasley family embarrassment, not an exposed traitor. Sirius is driven further underground, hunted without purpose, while the true spy network Voldemort left coiled around the Ministry remains intact. The world believes the wrong man is dangerous. They are wrong. By the fourth year, 1994 to 1995, the war accelerates. The Triwizard Tournament proceeds without Harry as a sacrificial centerpiece, yet Voldemort's strategy has matured. He no longer requires the theatrical symmetry of the boy who lived's blood. Any champion will do, or failing that, the now corporeal Riddle from the chamber can be harvested as a masterpiece, to be moulded and merged. The ritual may be delayed by months, but when it occurs, it does so without public witnesses, without priori incantatem, without a convenient graveyard monologue to brief the order. Voldemort returns in near-perfect secrecy, his resurrection a classified event known only to his inner circle and a handful of doomed auras. In canon, Harry's accidental courage functions as a drag coefficient on evil, forcing premature reveals, sloppy improvisations, and politically visible crises. Remove that child from the board, and the dark does not recede. It professionalizes. Voldemort's return is no longer a question of if, but of when and how. Violently, and in this timeline, the when arrives earlier, sharper, and almost invisible. By the time anyone in authority realizes the true scale of the breach, the boy they once labeled a potential obscurial is no longer a neglected child in a cupboard. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, and both sides are already too late. The diary that lived, Voldemort's dark evolution without a nemesis. The diary does not fail in this timeline. It is simply given more time. Without Harry to wrench Ginny Weasley out of the chamber, the possession is not a brief, harrowing episode, but a slow, methodical certainty. Weeks stretch into months. The gaps in her memory widen. Her handwriting, her laughter, her very gait begin to echo someone else. Each confession she bleeds into the pages is another artery opened, another line of power feeding Tom Riddle's waiting shadow. By the time the staff even agree that something is fundamentally wrong, the diary has already crossed an invisible threshold. It is no longer just an artifact channeling a memory. It is a parasite that has learned to metabolize a living host. In the cold, echoing vault of the chamber, Ginny's body becomes an anchor, and the Horcrux drinks deeper, siphoning not only life but ambient Hogwarts magic old basilisk malice, and the residual soul resonance of Salazar's wards. The result is a riddle echo that can peel itself away from the book. A semi-corporeal adolescent Dark Lord who can walk, speak, and cast without fully existing. They are wrong, those historians who will later claim Voldemort's return began in a graveyard. It begins here with a schoolgirl's pulse slowing on the stone and a 16-year-old phantom taking his first independent breath. When the diary is finally discovered, perhaps clutched in Ginny's cooling hand, perhaps abandoned beside the petrified shell of a teacher. Destroying the object does not erase what is already condensed. The echo has learned the architecture of a body. It does not forget. Above this, far from the chamber's stagnant water, another remnant still haunts the edges of Albania. The wraith born at Godric's Hollow, thin as smoke and venom. In canon, that fragment must cling to hosts and rituals to survive. In the Slytherin timeline, it senses a new signal across the dark, a convergence. The diary echo, young and tactically lethal, and the hollow wraith, ancient and patient, begin to seek each other with the blind certainty of magnets. When they finally meet, perhaps in some ruined alpine monastery, perhaps in a nameless forest where wards rot on old stone, the fusion is not a resurrection so much as an edit. Voldemort becomes a palimpsest of selves. Tom Riddle's schoolboy charisma and brilliance, written cleanly on top. Beneath it, the cold, inhuman will of the post-Horcrux monster. Beneath that, the original visionary who once spoke of remaking the wizarding world. The fear of a prophesied child does not shape him. Harry is a rumour that never hardened into obsession. War moves early. Attacks begin as disappearances. A Muggle-born family vanishing here. A minor bureaucrat at the ministry, refusing a bribe and then never reporting to work again. A werewolf pack quietly redirected toward targeted prey. Hogwarts, lacking its accidental Gryffindor catalyst, does not stand above the conflict. It sinks into it, becoming a fortress, contested by governors, aurors, and infiltrators who answer to this more coherent lord. By the time Harry finally stands at the gates, the battleground is already laid out beneath the towers. Somewhere, deep underground, or high within an unplottable stronghold, this fused Voldemort sits in cultivated silence, feeling his power radiate through new networks of allegiance and fear. Then, one night, his attention snaps westward. A flare of wild, uncontrolled magic tears through the wards of a small suburban street in Surrey, bright enough to sting even his layered soul. A variable he personally remembers killing has just announced itself to the world, and for the first time in years, Voldemort turns his full gaze toward a boy he has never met. The book wakes up, how Hogwarts finally remembers Harry Potter. The first entity to notice Harry Potter is not a man at all. It is a book, high in the oldest tower, where dust lies thick as a second parchment over stone. The Book of Admittance rests in its iron cradle, an administrative relic that is also a quiet sovereign. For years in this timeline, its pages have held a carefully engineered absence, a name scorched into destiny, and yet, by layered obfuscation and wardcraft, rendered administratively irrelevant. Harry James Potter, written once, then smudged by design. When the surge from Surrey detonates through the ambient magic of Britain. The book convulses. Ink that has slept for a decade liquefies. Letters bleeding sideways as if dragged by an unseen tide. Lines reconfigure with methodical certainty. Dates crawl, cross out, and rewrite themselves as the system that has politely colluded with Dumbledore's delay finds it can no longer justify the omission. The quill beside it, that tireless instrument of institutional memory, jerks awake and begins to scratch, angry, insistent, tactically lethal in its implications. Around Privet Drive, the polite veil of Muggle normalcy frays. The protective lattice, Dumbledore anchored there, blood wards, notice-me-nots, subtle repulsion fields, shivers like glass under a singer's note. Harry's power, untrained and furious, pushes outward, lamps flicker, hedges twist, reality itself feels misaligned. To the Ministry's trace, it is a statistical anomaly. To Hogwarts, whose ancient consciousness tastes magic the way a predator tastes blood in water, it is soul resonance, long overdue. The fog thins. A missing asset has stopped pretending to be missing. It is Minerva McGonagall who sees the betrayal in ink. She comes to the tower expecting routine, a cross-check of incoming first years, a quiet confirmation that the next cohort of 11-year-olds has been properly tagged and contacted. Instead, she finds a page rewriting itself in real time, Harry's name flaring bright black, the admission date sliding grotesquely across the margin from 11 to 15. Beside it, in a cramped, almost embarrassed hand, a notation appears. Status, uncontacted. The word lands like an accusation. Hogwarts, that fortress of continuity, has in effect abandoned the boy who lived, and, not by accident. When she brings the ledger to Dumbledore, the conflict is not loud. It is worse. It is quiet. The headmaster studies the living parchment, the way the letters refuse to be pacified, and understands that the institution he nominally commands has turned on him with the cold, impersonal authority of a contract finally enforced. Hogwarts wants its wizard, now. Dumbledore, however, sees something else. A weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be moulded that has been allowed to harden without his hand. An older Harry, self-taught, angry, already noticed by a resurrected riddle, introducing that variable into stone corridors and adolescent politics is not education. It is war. For a moment, the Slytherin timeline threatens to begin inside his own school. The pattern breaks here. Hogwarts does not generate a warm, explanatory welcome. No parchment promising term dates and house tables. Instead, guided by the book's corrected verdict, the castle issues something colder, edged with compulsion and ancient rite. Not a letter, a summons. Harry Potter is no longer being invited to attend. He is being recalled. Terms of engagement, Dumbledore, the Ministry, and a reluctant prodigy. The summons does not deliver him to warmth or wonder. It delivers him to a room designed to erase personality. Pale stone, a rectangular table, chairs that are comfortable without ever being soft. This is not Hogwarts' great hall, but a sealed ministry conference chamber, layered in neutral wards and monitored by unspeakables behind mirrored glass. Harry arrives not as an awestruck child clutching a ticket to platform 9 3/4, but escorted by two auras whose wands never quite point away from him. In this timeline, the boy who lived is an unregistered magical anomaly, a potential security breach who has survived a decade without guidance. The wizarding world imagines this will be a recruitment. They are wrong. What unfolds is an interrogation that mutates into a negotiation, then into something colder, a contract. Dumbledore sits at the far end of the table, robes muted, hands folded, with theatrical calm. The usual grandfatherly twinkle has been filed down to something more appropriate to a war council. He is not the benevolent headmaster welcoming a first year, but a strategist confronting a variable he has failed to control. Across from him, Harry takes his seat with the wary stillness of a boy who has learned that every adult conversation is a prelude to punishment. The ministry delegation, two senior officials and a stenographer whose quill scratches with methodical certainty, oscillates between deference to the prophecy child and the bureaucratic reflex to classify, contain, and, if necessary, erase. The opening minutes are a ledger of failures. Years of silence are recast as protective distance. Missed letters become administrative irregularities. Unreported magical outbursts at Privet Drive are politely rebranded as ambient surges, flagged by the trace. Harry listens, expression flat, as his life is summarized in phrases that would fit neatly into a file. A weapon being polished in the dark, except no one bothered to check who was holding the whetstone. The terms, when they finally surface, are painfully explicit. Hogwarts will accept him. Belatedly, grudgingly, as a special admit his lack of formal training, retroactively excused. In exchange, the ministry will grant blanket amnesty for all past uncontrolled magic, from shattered glass to vanishing zoo enclosures. Dumbledore insists, almost gently, that the Dursleys will be placed under discreet protection, whether Harry desires it or not. Their continued survival is, inconveniently, still bound to blood wards and a prophecy's logic. Then comes the monitoring clause. They propose it as support, regular evaluations, enchanted bracelets to stabilize soul resonance, periodic interviews with auras and mind healers. Harry hears what it truly is: surveillance. He does not refuse. He revises. If they will watch him, he will watch back. Access to his own file, transparency on every spell placed on his person, the right to know who reads his reports and why. Mutual observation, not obedience. The Slytherin timeline writes itself into his posture as he demands parity. It is here that the Trojan horse metaphor crystallizes for him with chilling clarity. Hogwarts is not a sanctuary. It is a fortress embedded at the heart of magical authority, a training ground wired directly into the power structures that abandoned him. Entering it will not mean being rescued. It will mean being wheeled, gift-wrapped into the city he intends, one day, to rule or ruin. He accepts the offer, but not as a supplicant. He accepts as an infiltrator. And then he names his final condition. Full access, he says, to every record on Voldemort, every prophecy transcript, every sealed document bearing the name Potter. No more curated half-truths, no more strategic omissions in the name of childhood. Dumbledore's mask stills. To concede is to expose the war's deepest failures. To refuse is to watch the boy who lived stand up, walk out, and become a free-floating weapon with no allegiance but his own. The room holds its breath while he decides which future to create. A different kind of first year, Harry's late arrival at a world at war. Dumbledore chooses the leash. By the time the boats cut through the black glass of the lake, this is not an orphan's fairy tale crossing. It is insertion. Harry sits upright, weight balanced, cataloguing. The castle on the cliff is not a dream made stone. It is a target profile, elevation, approach vectors, arrow slits repurposed as wand positions, the way the very air thickens as centuries of layered wards press down on his skin. Wonder is present, yes, but locked behind alpine marble composure. In this timeline, his first sight of Hogwarts is reconnaissance. He notes the glow of the Great Hall's windows as a potential morale center, the dark mass of the Forbidden Forest as cover and threat, the boathouse as an extraction point where another boy would only see candles and stars. Harry feels soul resonance humming in the foundations, a fortress that has forgotten it is built for war. The students waiting on the shore see only the surface. They are wrong. To them, he is pale, self-contained, a transfer curiosity with foreign tailoring and eyes that do not widen on cue. The visual metaphor writes itself. Alpine marble, veined not with fragility, but with pressure lines, a storm contained in glass. His politeness is flawless, his distance absolute. Ron Weasley, already a veteran of whispered legends about the missing boy who lived, stares as if a bedtime story has stepped off a chocolate frog card and refused to smile. He tries jokes, Quidditch talk, shared outrage about homework that never was. Harry answers, but every response is measured, as if testing the structural integrity of a bridge before stepping onto it. Ron senses the gap and cannot name it. This is not a friend arriving. It is a variable entering his world. Hermione Granger is no eager first year here. She is a fourth year whose name is already on academic prize lists, whose essays circulate among professors as model work. For 3 years, her metric of value has been effort and excellence. Now the hall buzzes with a myth who has done neither and yet bends every gaze. The resentment is quiet but sharp. To her, Harry is not a hero, but an unearned gravitational field, a masterpiece to be molded by other people's projections. Draco Malfoy, taller, sharper, trained by a war that has already restarted, watches with predatory calculation. In the Slytherin timeline, he has been raised on both propaganda and private warnings. The boy who lived as rival heir, as potential ally, as weapon being polished in the dark far from Malfoy control. When their eyes meet, across the crush of students, there is no childish sneer, only recognition. Legacy seeing legacy. Hogwarts itself receives Harry not as home, but as arena. Corridors resolve instantly into choke points and fallback routes. Staircases are moving variables in a live tactical map. Houses are not families but factions, with distinct resource pools. Gryffindor as shock troops, Ravenclaw as research division, Hufflepuff as logistics and morale, Slytherin as black ops and political infrastructure. Every class on his timetable is an intelligence gathering opportunity. Every professor a potential asset or future obstacle. Pattern interrupt. He does accidental magic before he has a wand, a drifting candle that flares and sharpens when he glances at it. A goblet that slides precisely into his waiting hand without conscious intent. It is small, but to battle-hardened staff, it is tactically lethal evidence. This is not the blank slate they expected. Snape's eyes narrow, McGonagall's quill stills mid-note. Even Dumbledore recalculates behind the beard. Methodical certainty meets an unknown variable. Then the sorting. The hall, a low roar of speculation and torchlight. Name after name, hat after som-tinged quip. Until Potter, Harry, the buzz spikes, then collapses into silence. The hat descends. Nothing happens. No jaunty verse. No immediate verdict. Just a long, expanding absence of sound as the ancient artifact encounters a mind layered in occlumency, drilled in counterlegilimency patterns, and bearing the magical scar tissue of two warring Dark Lords. The pause stretches beyond comfort, beyond tradition, until the entire hall understands, viscerally, that whatever house he claims, this is not a normal student. The war has just walked through the front door and sat down at their table. Forged in absence, Harry's power, curriculum, and inner fortress. The hat's verdict is only the opening argument. Hogwarts, in this timeline, does not receive a child. It receives a containment problem with a timetable. Within days, Harry's schedule bears almost no resemblance to a normal third year's timetable. Publicly, he attends remedial basics, charms, transfiguration, potions, where professors painstakingly overwrite the crude, survival-driven spellwork he has developed alone under the Tracer's indifferent gaze. Privately, however, his life is carved into sealed hours, occlumency at dawn, defensive casting at dusk, and in between, controlled detonation of the raw power that once cracked Dudley's ribs and shattered street lamps in Little Whinging. This is not education. It is a containment and cultivation program, a weapon being polished in the dark. His canon traits do not disappear. They metastasize. The boy who once simply took to a broom now demonstrates a near predatory spatial awareness. On the practice pitch, he threads between bludgers and wards with the same instinctive precision he once used to dodge Uncle Vernon's fists. Flight becomes three-dimensional battlefield calculus, every angle a potential escape vector or killing line. His knack for breaking rules, honed through years of slipping past cat flaps and locked cupboards, is quietly redirected. In negotiations with Snape over curriculum, in dueling drills where he deliberately skirts the edge of what is legal, he learns to bend regulations until they scream, without technically snapping. Even the infamous saving people thing erodes into something colder. After a decade in which no one came, Harry develops a brutal internal triage. He will intervene, but only where the outcome justifies the risk. To manage this, the staff begin to name disciplines that double as maps of his psyche. Occlumency is no longer an esoteric art. It is the architectural project of his life, the construction of an inner fortress after a childhood with no locked door that was truly his. Etiquette, drilled in small, excruciating dinners with McGonagall and the more politically literate ghosts, becomes armor in public spaces, a polished carapace he can raise between himself and the world's hungry expectations. dueling, taught by Flitwick with methodical certainty and a historian's precision, reveals a language Harry finds disturbingly fluent, as if each shield and stunner resonates with some buried soul resonance of prior wars. Psychologically, Hogwarts teaches him a subtler lesson: how to perform obedience without conceding ownership. Harry learns to nod when Dumbledore outlines opportunities for growth, to accept guidance in the way one might accept a map, useful but never binding. Inside, he holds a private veto over every instruction, a quiet assertion of sovereignty that no adult, not even the headmaster, is permitted to breach. They see a cooperative student. They are wrong. The fracture line becomes visible during a late-night training session in the room of requirement, refitted as a dueling hall. Flitwick pushes him harder, faster, layering hex upon hex until the air hums with lethal intent. Cornered, Harry stops thinking. Something older answers. The shield he throws is not textbook. It is a roaring, concussive wave that slams into the walls, snuffs every torch, and drops Flitwick to one knee, white-faced, wand shaking. For 3 heartbeats, the castle itself seems to recoil. Far beyond the wards, in a manner steeped in older, darker authority, someone feels the surge, pauses mid-conversation, and smiles. The war has just noticed him back. Mirror and foil, Voldemort's interest, and the shadow dialogue. Far beyond the wards, the smile is not surprise. It is confirmation. Voldemort has been waiting for this spike in the ambient noise of fate, the moment when the forgotten variable in his old equation finally announces himself to the world by shattering a classroom. In this timeline, his intelligence network is not a theatrical collection of masked fanatics, but a lattice of informants, glamoured bureaucrats, and cursed ledgers humming quietly in ministry archives. One such ledger, keyed to unusual underage magic and Hogwarts enrollment anomalies, records a late third-year admission. Potter, Harry. The name is a fracture line through his methodical certainty. He remembers a prophecy half heard in a smoky room. A child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and he had built a war on the assumption that child would be shaped by Dumbledore. They are wrong. The world that still repeats the boy who lived myth, as if it were a closed chapter. So was he. He retreats to a private chamber, wards it into a personal fortress of silence, and reruns the prophecy in his mind with altered parameters. A boy denied Hogwarts at 11, a boy whose magic matured feral, unsupervised under Muggle contempt rather than wizarding awe. The symmetry is too precise to ignore. Tom Riddle grew in an orphanage that feared him. Harry Potter grew in a suburban prison that hated him. Both discovered magic alone, learned that power was the only reliable insulation against humiliation, and met the wizarding world not as natives, but as invaders. In the canonical timeline, Voldemort underestimates a schoolboy, seeing only sentiment and Gryffindor impulse. In the Slytherin timeline of his own imagination now, the boy is something else, a weapon being polished in the dark, but by neglect rather than design. That makes him volatile, tactically lethal, and potentially useful. Recruitment becomes a non-zero possibility. Corruption, more likely. At minimum, study. His strategy shifts with serpentine grace. Instead of planning a single theatrical confrontation, he instructs his agents to collect every scrap of data on Potter's duels, detentions, even his essays. He wants to know how a self-taught mind structures power when finally given vocabulary. He sends out cursed objects, calibrated not to possess, but to resonate, small artifacts seeded through the black market, tuned to the peculiar off-textbook signatures that erupt when someone has learned magic by instinct and rage. That is when the shadow dialogue begins. Harry's dreams, already unstable from a childhood of suppressed magic, thicken with corridors that are not Hogwarts and doors that open onto an alpine orphanage that was never his. Voldemort tests the boundary with distant legilimency brushes, not full invasions, but featherlight inquiries, tasting the edges of occlumency that no one has formally taught Harry. The soul resonance between Horcrux and Host, already a fault line, deepens into something conversational, flashes of shared perspective, moments where Harry's contempt for authority feels eerily familiar, even to himself. Mythically, they are no longer hero and villain, but rival proofs of the same theorem, one outcome of magical childhood in total ignorance, one outcome of magical childhood in total contempt for ignorance. When they finally meet, it will not be a simple duel for the world, but an argument about what power is for, conducted in curses and counterspells. And as the year advances, both men begin, in different rooms and different darknesses, to plan not merely how to kill the other, but how to survive what killing the other will mean. Behind closed doors, Harry versus Dumbledore in the headmaster's office. The first real collision does not happen on a battlefield. It happens behind a door that pretends to be oak and ordinary, summoned by a polite note and an unmistakable command. Harry ascends the moving staircase into the headmaster's office, into a room that is itself a thesis about power. Shelves bowed under the weight of wizarding history, whirring silver instruments, exhaling soft plumes of light, portraits pretending to sleep while they listen. Fawkes watches from his golden perch, head tilted, as if gauging the soul resonance of the boy Bellatrix did not raise, but whom the war has nonetheless carved into a weapon. Dumbledore frames this meeting as guidance, an invitation to discuss how he is settling, a chance to offer pastoral care to the boy who arrived late to Hogwarts, and earlier too. Trauma, but in this timeline, both of them understand the fiction. The old man wants to measure the masterpiece that slipped through his fingers for a decade. Harry wants to map the fortress that has quietly ruled his life from a distance. The silence between them is not awkward, it is strategic. When Dumbledore's gaze settles, it is gentle, apologetic, and, crucially, active. A feather-light brush of legilimency, the kind that has steered 100 malleable children, extends toward Harry's mind with methodical certainty, expecting soft clay and scattered images of an alpine childhood that never was. They are wrong, these expectations. What he meets instead is impact. Walls built from cupboard dark, from counted bruises, from years of learning exactly which thoughts must never show on his face if he wants to eat. The probe rebounds, not violently, but decisively, like a spell striking a shield it did not know existed. Harry does not flinch. He merely notes the intrusion, files it, and lets his eyes cool by a single invisible degree. The Slytherin timeline has not given him a godmother. It has given him Dudley's fists, Petunia's contempt, and the trace as his only admission that another world even exists. Occlumency here is not a discipline. It is an instinct. Their dialogue becomes a duel conducted in courtesy. Dumbledore offers wisdom, framed as gentle nudges. There are dangers rising, he says, old magic stirring. Responsibilities Harry may be called to shoulder. Harry, in turn, acknowledges the man's authority and knowledge, but refuses the leash. Calmly, almost academically, he insists on terms. Full information about the prophecy, about why his childhood was sacrificed to Privet Drive, about Voldemort's current state beyond vague reassurances that all is being handled. The tension breaks only when Dumbledore presents him with the invisibility cloak. He tells Harry it belonged to his father. For a fractional second, Harry's hand trembles, not at the gift, but at the sudden unbearable proof that his parents were not just names in a file or weapons in someone else's war. Rage and grief surge up, tactically lethal if unleashed. The fortress of his mind flickers, shows its battlements, then seals. Dumbledore sees the crack and understands the danger. This is not a boy to be guided by half-truths. This is a weapon being polished in the dark, one that might decide its own target. As Harry leaves, wards humming faintly around the office, the headmaster realizes that mishandling this negotiation will not merely lose him an ally, it may produce a second Dark Lord, one who learned his lessons from both Voldemort and the Dursleys, and who will not make the same mistakes either of them did. A world rewritten, deaths, alliances, and the cost of a missing letter. From that office, the consequences radiate outward like cracks in glass. In this timeline, the missing letter does not simply delay a boy's schooling. It re-engineers the casualties and alliances of an entire war. Ginny Weasley's fate is the first open wound. Without Harry on the train, without the easy, awkward kindness of the boy who lived at 11, she enters Hogwarts already brittle from poverty, hand-me-downs, and a family stretched thin. When the diary whispers, there is no counterweight of rescue mythology to cling to. The chamber stays open longer. The basilisk hunts with methodical certainty. Whether she survives as a traumatized husk or dies nameless beneath the school, the result is the same. The Weasleys are broken around a void Harry was meant to fill. Their home, once a future fortress of found family, becomes something else entirely. Ron grows up without a legendary best friend validating his worth. He is merely another boy who could not save his sister. Hermione, arriving as a muggle born into a Hogwarts already haunted by a reopened chamber, learns early that knowledge does not guarantee safety, only marginally better odds. Their friendship forms in the shadow of institutional failure, not around the bright center of a shared hero. So when Harry finally appears, older, sharper, carrying the residue of years weaponized by neglect, he is not their nucleus. He is an intrusion. Every adventure after that carries an extra layer of friction. Ron resents his belated importance. Hermione distrusts his improvisational risk-taking, and the trio's legendary soul resonance becomes a fragile, negotiated alliance rather than an instinctive bond. Institutionally, the world hardens. A Hogwarts that has already closed and reopened over the chamber is a school under probation, not a whimsical castle. Governors impose harsher oversight. Dumbledore's authority is clipped. The Ministry, having faced unexplained petrifications, a near mass casualty event, and a Muggle-raised boy whose magic flares uncontrollably outside their frameworks, answers with bureaucracy and fear. More decrees, more surveillance, less trust. When the Order of the Phoenix reforms, it does so earlier and with a colder calculus. Harry is not a prophesied child to be gently guided, but a volatile asset, perhaps a masterpiece to be moulded, perhaps a weapon being polished in the dark. Pettigrew thrives in the gaps, with Sirius either rotting longer in Azkaban or dying on the run after a botched, letterless search for his godson. There is no dog-shaped guardian orbiting Harry's life, no mad laughter in a cave offering unconditional love. Wormtail moves with fewer constraints, rebuilding Voldemort's network, while the Ministry congratulates itself on Titan's security. They are wrong. Is this world better or worse? Earlier awareness of Voldemort's return might save lives that were lost in the original war. Yet the absence of a boy trained by friendship to choose compassion over calculation creates different dead. Ginny in the chamber, perhaps Sirius in a gutter, perhaps nameless Muggleborns targeted by a more tactically lethal Death Eater resurgence. And all of it, every altered grave and twisted allegiance, spirals from a single administrative failure, a letter that never arrived. The horror is not its grandeur, but its plausibility in a world run by fallible institutions. The next section asks the only question that matters now. What does Harry do when he finally understands that the war he inherits was built on that silence, the price of silence? What this timeline reveals about Harry Potter. When Harry finally names the silence as violence, canon itself begins to look thin, more like a narrow escape held together by fraying contingency plans and exhausted adults. The heroic narrative insists that the boy who lived was always going to find his wand, his house, his war. They are wrong. In the original books, Hagrid's knock feels inevitable, McGonagall's watchfulness feels omniscient, Dumbledore's partial honesty feels sufficient. Yet, this timeline exposes how fragile each intervention truly is. A half-giant whose motorbike could have broken down, a deputy headmistress who cannot patrol every suburban street, a headmaster who gambles that a child can survive another year of neglect. The Hogwarts letter system escalates, yes, but it is still an institution, not an oath. Administrative failure is not an anomaly. It is the background hum of the wizarding world. In this timeline, that hum becomes a scream. Harry grows not as a nurtured student, but as a self-taught anomaly flagged by the trace, a weapon being polished in the dark by accident and anger, rather than by curriculum. When he finally crosses the threshold of Hogwarts, late, wary, already fluent in pain, he does not see a home. He sees an arena. Classrooms become testing grounds for leverage. Houses read as factions. The castle's stone corridors feel less like a sanctuary and more like a contested fortress whose authority must be audited before it is obeyed. This alternate Harry treats Dumbledore not as a benevolent grandfather, but as a negotiator who arrived years too late to claim moral jurisdiction. Voldemort, when he returns, is not a distant monster in the forest, but a dark mirror. another boy the world mishandled until he learned to make war on it. Their soul resonance shifts. It is no longer simply prophecy and Horcruxes, but a shared biography of institutional failure, diverging only in how each chooses to answer the same wound. Thematically, the silence around that missing letter drags buried questions to the surface. How many monsters in this world are handmade by neglect, disguised as policy? At what point does "we did our best" collapse into complicity? When the Ministry ignores unexplained outbursts of accidental magic at Privet Drive, when Hogwarts does not send McGonagall to the door, when Dumbledore withholds the full stakes of the prophecy to preserve his own long game, the line between protection and abandonment blurs. Harry and Voldemort stop being simple opposites. They become case studies in what happens when the world either shows up late or not at all. Would this Harry ever forgive the Wizarding World for that delay? Would he sit in the headmaster's office and grant Dumbledore a second chance at trust? Or would every Order recruitment pitch sound like retroactive justification for leaving him in the cupboard? And if the letter never comes, who arrives first to fill the silence? Hagrid or a resurrected Voldemort offering a longing before Hogwarts remembers its duty? That is the next fracture line. One missed knock away lies a branch where Harry is not merely late to school, but intercepted, recruited as an asset by Death Eaters, or claimed early by a different guardian whose ideology reshapes him into a masterpiece to be molded from the ground up. If you want to see how far that can go, the Slytherin timeline, where Harry is engineered into a tactically lethal stabilizer rather than a Gryffindor savior, stay in this archive with us. Tell me in the comments, where does neglect in this world become indistinguishable from betrayal? And what would your Harry do when the silence finally breaks? Subscribe, and we will keep pulling on these threads, treating the Wizarding World not as fixed canon, but as a fragile system, always one forgotten letter away from collapse.